welcome, Nuskmata, and please would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us where you are today, and let's start there.
Okay. Yaus Madam Hooks, Unsla Nuskmata. Hello, relatives. My name is Nuskmata. I'm from the Nuskalsk village of the Nukhalk Nation, and that's located on the northwest coast of so-called Canada. We are sovereign people. We've never signed away any of our lands, and we are an occupied nation. I'm coming to you today from the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity up in the Rocky Mountains, where I'm here with other Indigenous musicians, and we're creating songs for the revolution. we're we're focusing on the land and our people, and a healthy, beautiful future looking forward. So I'm happy to be here today.
That's great, and that's a lovely introduction. Nuskmata, our topic here today is the Mount Polley mine disaster, and I believe you were the response coordinator at that time. Can you take us back to that time? Tell us first how you ended up being the response coordinator, and then give us the story of the whole disaster for your community.
I was hired as the natural resources manager for the Chet'ul First Nation, and that's in the northern Secwépemc homelands of what's now considered the interior plateau of British Columbia, Canada. And within our territory, we have a lot of mining, and actually it's really tied to the history of colonization because there was so much gold and there was a huge gold rush in the 1850s. And so when the gold rush from California was ending, and there were water restrictions and guidelines happening there, people moved north and they came into British Columbia, or what would become British Columbia after all of the mining started. And the mining in the area actually are foundational laws for the province of British Columbia to be established. And a lot of the laws have remained unchanged even since the 1850s. So we're working really hard to update them. In 2024, in 2014, the Mount Polley mine, Imperial Metals Mount Polley mine, tailings facility, the waste storage facility collapsed under its own weight. It had gotten too big. There wasn't enough buttressing. There wasn't enough support on the dam wall. And so the wall slipped, and there was a layer of glacial clay underneath the dam. And so when that happened, all of the waste and the water covering the waste all started to flow out of the tailings facility and down the mountain path along the Hazeltine Creek down into Quesnel Lake. And so that was a catastrophic fail event. And this mine was really held up. Mount Polley mine was really held up by the province of BC and the mining industry as like the crown jewel of mining, Imperial Metals crown jewel, very colonial, and it failed in under 20 years. And they had all the best engineers, all the best experts, and it still failed in under 20 years. And what we learned within the big investigation afterward is that there were alarm systems that weren't working, that weren't being checked. The mine was monitoring itself. Everything was getting offloaded by the Ministry of Environment and other ministries that were supposed to be watching the mine. And when this disaster happened, it was really experienced as a death in our community. And we actually had ceremonies on the river and out in the area of grieving and mourning ceremonies to acknowledge that this relative, this lake, this living system of ours had been impacted again by mining. And people were really hurt and really afraid because the salmon were coming up the river at the same time. So we knew it was impacting the water, it was impacting all of the wildlife in the area. It's a very special ceremonial place. The salmon were coming, and it washed the remnants of our ancient villages off the side of the mountain with the slide coming down. So it was just layer on layer on layer, and people were just devastated.
Right. That's a lot to take on in one conversation. The first fact about that that really astonished me was that it was only 20 years old and before it collapsed. That's
Yeah, just under 20 years. Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
It wasn't even 20 years old. Yeah, in less than 20 years it failed. And so this was the model that Imperial Metals was using to build other mines. And so the next mine after this was the Red Chris mine in Tahltan territory. So it really sent ripple effects out into Indigenous communities, out into the mining community. There were um, so many cracks in the system that worked well to make money, but not well to protect communities, to protect the water, to protect the wildlife and the birds. All of the cumulative impacts were going unchecked.
And in your community, what was the attitude to mining before the mining collapse, before the waste waste went into the creek and into the lakes, and in general within your community locally?
I think people who worked at the mine just kind of kept their heads down and were working along. And then when the disaster happened, it really brought into focus, this is real. Not only is it possible to happen, it has happened, and now we have to deal with the impacts of that, which are unknown. And the mine had no plan to deal with a disaster because they simply told us it was an impossible event, and it happened in less than 20 years. So it really brought into question people who were working there, if they even wanted to continue working at the mine. There was a lot of education that happened about mining after that because I was sharing everything that I knew. I created a Facebook page because I was just sharing everything on my personal account. I was like, we need somewhere where all of this can go that will live beyond me. And so I created a page, Mount Polley Mine Disaster Information. I think I just kept it really simple and added all of the newspaper clippings and added comments like, that's not quite right. This is actually what's happening. Here's a meeting that's coming up, just try to put everything as transparently as possible. And people really started to question mining and started to talk about mining as a colonial instrument and started to look at the mining laws, which are so outdated. So it really created a lot of noise. And it was wild to me that just, how much people were learning, like they were reading the mining codes and the Mineral Tenure Act, and they were reading the permits, and they were really wanting to get to the bottom of it, to the truth, because the mine was deflecting and denying and playing it down, of course. And the community members were like, we want this shut down forever, which didn't happen. The mine was eventually permitted to go back into business. And they said, well, we can't afford to clean it up if we're not operating. And so they were allowed to continue operating, and they cleaned up enough for them to go back into business. But the rest of the waste and the tailings is still in the forest beside the creek, and it's still at the bottom of the lake, which is still drawn upon for cleaning drinking water.
Okay, so a couple of questions there. Can you describe the creek and the lake before the mining disaster?
Yeah, so before the disaster, the little creek that came out below the tailings dam drained out from a lake that was very close to the mine called Polley Lake. And there was a little creek that came out of it, trickled down. That was Hazeltine Creek. And that creek was about 4 feet across, very shallow. It was coho salmon spawning habitat. And then it drained down into the lake, the larger lake below, which is a great big deep fjord lake. It has its own weather system. It's very beautiful, very clean. There's been some logging in the area in the past, but basically, like the water in that lake, in that deep Quesnel Lake, was much cleaner than water quality drinking standards. And the aquatic life in there, it was so clean and so cold. It was a major nursing habitat for salmon, of all five species of salmon, coming up the Fraser River into the Quesnel River and then into Quesnel Lake system. So very clean water, massive abundance of water for our territory, interior rainforest, and it was completely transformed after the disaster. Because when that dam broke, it came down this little 4-foot creek, like 4-foot wide creek, and scoured out. Like in some places, it was probably like 60 feet wide, scoured down to bedrock. All of the trees, all of the soil, everything in its path got washed out. And while that dam was draining, it sounded like jumbo jet engines roaring for like 12 to 15 hours as it just poured out of the dam down into the lake.
So a creek that was 4 feet wide suddenly becomes 50 or 60 feet wide, and it's scored. And looking at it today, what does it look like?
Today, it looks like a rock canyon coming down from the mine site. It's there's tailings all along the side of the creek still. They didn't remove it. So the animals are still walking through it. We saw tracks going through the tailings. Birds are still nesting in the area. When you get down to the bottom of the creek, it deltas out to probably, oh, maybe 200 to 300 feet wide, maybe like 100 to 150 meters wide at the
Wow.
bottom, a huge delta. And right after the disaster, like, of course, all the forest had been scoured out. So there were just massive amounts of trees in the water, and the sediments were like dropping down into the lake. And I believe one of the fisheries techs had said that it used to be like a 200-foot uh, like drop in the lake, and then after the tailings came in, it went down to like 50 feet
The
below the
drop.
surface of the water. Yeah, so it had filled this huge canyon under with all of those tailings. So there's a massive amount of tailings in the lake still.
So
Yeah,
because it was so dense, it had gone to the bottom of the lake, and so that's where it
yeah,
lies to this day. Is that correct?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And the delta, like on the sides of the canyon in the delta where it's wider and flatter by the lake, none of the trees have grown back. They planted 50,000 stems of willow, which grows everywhere in
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
little bit, right? They planted 50,000 stems of willow in their reclamation process, and it wouldn't grow in the
That
tailings.
that's extraordinary because we're very familiar with willow here, and there's a local joke. If you stood still with a willow walking stick, it would root in the ground, and for
Yeah.
and for it not to root, that's extraordinary. And I was actually looking at some of the company videos, and they were bumming about how well their reclamation was going and how well the trees were growing and all that. So it's lovely to hear the other side of it. Obviously I can't go and see it myself. So because it was such a pristine area, pristine nature, full of nature, your people, you talk about the importance of the salmon. We have no idea of the culture around the salmon. I have some idea because I've been reading up about it, but could you explain to people in Ireland about the culture of the salmon in relation to your people?
The salmon are a really keystone species for food, but also culturally, because they bring us to the river, and it's our relationship with the river that really is a key part of our culture. And the salmon are used to get through the winter months. So we dry the salmon with smoke and salt and wind in the summer months and preserve that for the winter. We jar the salmon, we home preserve it in glass jars, home preserving. We freeze it, we make it into soups, we trade it for other foods and medicines. And so without that salmon, there's this really big gap, not only for nutrition, but we're not going to the river, we're not going to those places anymore. So it really is more than just protein on a plate for us. It's a really my partner who's passed would say that salmon brings families together and keeps families together. You know, we harvest together, we process, we eat the food together, and there's a real loving component to that keeps us strong. And so it was a devastation to think that, well, the reality of like a lot of people just never fished anymore after that disaster happened. And it's like, what do you eat? You know, what do you eat if you don't have salmon? So it was a really difficult time, and still people are having trouble with it because a lot of people don't have the confidence to eat it anymore.
So, salmon would be fundamental to your tradition and culture. Would you agree?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
salmon is fundamental to our traditional culture, and all along the river, not just our community, all along the Fraser River, and it connects us to our neighbors at the mouth of the river and along the coast as well. So
of course.
the salmon comes up the rivers to spawn in the interior, in the mountains, in the lakes, and then goes down to the ocean to spend its time. So it wasn't only us, it was all of the coastal nations too that also depend on salmon that are moving through their territories when they're fishing. So it just had this huge unknown ripple effect. And, just that impact of like, is it even safe to eat? All of the bioaccumulation, the compacting
Yeah.
of that in the body, and to eat that, it just made people feel really uneasy to eat it again.
That's extraordinary, to suddenly to have that completely taken out from underneath you and not being able to trust it. It's like almost not being able to trust your own body, and yet you feel like you're letting the salmon down because you don't trust them, and it's heartbreaking. It is absolutely heartbreaking.
Absolutely. The mining industry has completely changed our relationship with salmon. It's changed our relationship with the lake, with the water, and it's changed relationships in our communities as well because were people who are working for the mine and that's how they put food on the table for their family. Not a lot of people, but enough that they could feel the tensions and the real social pressure to not say anything or they would lose their job. There was the fear that they would lose their job. And so, the difference between the mining culture and our indigenous culture, like our culture is about transparency and sharing the wealth and redistribution, and mining culture is all about extraction for like capital gain and greed at any cost. And so those two systems are coming up against each other, like human versus money.
Yeah, yeah, and on one side you've got materialistic, consume, devour, 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 and on the other side, what's what's of value to your people and our people is our tradition, our heritage, and everything that goes along with that. And materialism is very much second. It's really interesting because in our campaign, uh, everyone involved in it, nobody is interested in money or anything like that. It's just we realise what's at stake here, and we have different things, our bogs and our mountains, which are sacred to us, and the communities in those areas, which there'll be complete upheaval. And it already is. The mining has created splits in the community because a farmer sold his field to allow the mine in, and so all that takes place as well. So we can understand that, and how possibly in relation to the salmon, I know this will make you smile, but the potato is a big thing here for us, and there's very many traditions and so on around the potato and the eating of the potato, and we experienced a great hunger here caused by colonialism in the past, and I think 2 million people died as a result of that, and that's because the potato crops failed. But there was a reliance created by the colonial government here at the time that the people were forced to eat potato and nothing else. They had nothing else. So when you took the potato away, then that was really a way of clearing the land and getting rid of people. So similar story, different parts of the world, and around food as well, and around the salmon or around the potato. There probably was an element of tourism and other commercial things going on in relation to the pristine environment. Do those things still go on, or as a result of that, or have you noticed a difference?
Yeah, after the disaster, when all the tailings went into the water, it definitely changed the lake, which impacted the local lodges because people didn't want to come. Everybody canceled all of their reservations to come and fish and to be in the area out of fear for what all of the heavy metals were, in the water. And also for during the cleanup, they were burning the logs that were covered in the waste tailings, and so the smoke was in the air. And so that year in 2014, all of the lodges just basically didn't. They all of everything had been canceled for the rest of the summer and then all through the fall. So they lost money on that. There were people who were trying to sell their homes that couldn't sell their homes because they're basically the value had dropped so low after the disaster. Because it's like, well, where do you draw your water on the lake? Well, we don't want to be drinking mining tailings water. So that had impacts on folks. And I think that there's been some recovery since then. I think mostly because a lot of people have there's been enough time that people are kind of forgetting it's not in
Forgetting.
the news anymore. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know specifically, but I know that there were some deep impacts and people were looking for compensation. Some people received a bit of compensation, but from the mine, but it was a very like tedious and stressful and complicated process from what I heard. But I personally didn't apply for any of that, so I couldn't give you any specific numbers. But it was impacted, yeah.
And can I bring you back to the topic of water? What happened to the drinking water?
So after the disaster happened, there was a complete water ban. So no water was being used, like not even to flush the toilets, because they were like, we don't know what's in there. We don't know if you want to be bringing it into your home. And so that lasted for a couple of weeks. The water quality dropped from better than drinking water standards, better than aquatic levels for aquatic life to exist. And I had talked to one of the locals there who he had a filter on his water, and he said that he would change his filter every 2 years, not because it was clogged and needed to be changed. It would still look brand new, but because he just wanted to have, it was like, okay, well, I should change it. But after the disaster happened, he was changing his water filter every week. And he's just said the cost was very expensive to be doing that every single week just so that they were taking some of the turbidity out. And he said he also wasn't sure if it was getting all of the chemicals out because they use a lot of chemicals to process the gold and the silver and whatever they're after. And in addition to that, in the tailings facility, there's treated sewage that would be trucked up from Vancouver
Uh,
to put dumped into the tailings facility because it is a waste facility. And I think that's the biggest thing that people don't connect with a mine is they think about the gold, they think about the money, they think about all of the jobs, but they don't talk about that a mine is a waste storage facility. Like probably over 90% of what comes out of a mine and what is crushed up and put into the facility is waste. And not only that, but you're taking it deep from the ground, you're exposing it to air and the elements, which it's never been happened probably in millions of years.
yeah.
And you're creating a whole new environment. And so there's reasons why the tailings facility is covered in water is to limit that exposure to the wider environment. So when the disaster happened, all of that was just let loose in the world without any type of way to track it or to contain it. And now the mine is pumping directly the waste, the tailings into groundwater. And so there's no way to track that at all. And so they're getting sneakier and more clever in how they hide what those readings are.
When you say they're pumping, so they're pumping the mine out into groundwater. So because mines go so deep, for anyone that's listening to this, the pumps need to be going all the time to keep the water out of the mines. Is that the water you're talking about? Yeah, that they're pumping out.
It's the excess water from the tailings storage facility, from the waste
All right.
facility. So they cover it in water. And when they have too much water, that was what was happening. Like they need to have a stable level. And so when they get too much, because it's in an interior rainforest, so there's a lot of rain.
Yeah.
And so you have to deal with the excess water. So if you have too much water, or that's a problem too, right? And so you could topple the dam again. So they need to pump off the excess water. And so they're pumping that out into the creek, the little creek that's now the giant creek.
Yeah.
But they still needed to pump more because they had a certain amount they could pump into the creek, but they still needed to pump more water. So then they started pumping it into groundwater.
Oh, dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Absolutely disgusting. And our community and the community of Likely, the settler community of Likely, we have, challenged the permits. We have called it into question. We've called for more environmental assessments because actually Mount Polley Mine never underwent an environmental assessment when it was built. And so our community was pushing for saying like, we need to have a full environmental assessment before any expansion plans happen, before any more dumping happens. And it was denied.
And was there a reason given as to why it was denied, or you don't know, or you can't remember? Or...
Like the way that the permitting process is in Canada is that once you get the green light to build the project, basically the system is set up to just continue to permit Like it's
Okay.
called a permit. It's a
Yeah.
permit, it's an allowance, it's a yes. So it's a process to get to yes, always. And so getting a no is a very difficult thing. And even with a major disaster, we still didn't get a no, and the mine still didn't get a fine. So um that's how it is to mine in Canada. So that's why a lot of, I think over 70% of the world's mining companies are headquartered in Canada, because of the slack regulations. And it's just like the laws are geared to promote mining.
Right. Okay. So when a mine gets going, it really can't be stopped. So here we are. We haven't started our mine. What would you say to us in relation to that? What?
I would say that if the mine hasn't started yet, then you are in the strongest position that you will be in, from my experience, and to continue to organize and to push back and to have different speakers. And the community really has a lot more power than you think you do. Mines put a lot of money into messaging that makes it seem like it's a done deal. They talk about it in present tense. They talk about it like this will be, this is how we're going to do it. They call it the mine. I would say, really being aware of your language around calling it a proposed project, around instilling doubt into the mind, around, you know, um, having the community realize that there is power in that collective organizing. And the mine puts a lot of money toward trying to, smooth out public relations, and really here in Canada really focuses on jobs, but they never really tell you what kind of jobs. And so if local folks are working at the mine, in my experience, for our people, it's low level jobs that aren't union jobs. They don't get any additional training to advance in those jobs. And people are flown in from all over the world to do the more advanced jobs. And the labor workforce, like the general labor workforce, is coming from all over and has no connection to the local community. And there's an influx of money, an influx of drugs, an influx of alcohol, an influx of sexual violence. And so these are just facts. This is we've seen over and over and over. So, thinking about beyond just the job, it's like thinking about your children, thinking about the safety of your community, thinking about the health facilities, if they can even handle that influx of spikes in, trips to the hospital. All of those types of things aren't usually worked into like environmental impact assessment. So there's the bigger picture to think about and to really organize your community around that. And just your relationship with the land will be forever changed. Your like going out to Quesnel Lake to me is now it's a sad thing, whereas before it was so clean and so beautiful and so empowering, and we'd bathe in the lake and have ceremonies and all of that, and now it just feels like visiting a terminally ill relative. So it's very impactful.
That's such a strong image, what you've said there, and there's a lot for us to listen to and to become aware of. Just such a great opportunity, to have your experience right in front of the audience here in the Sperrin Mountains in Northern Ireland to hear that because that's what it's realistic. I'll draw you back a little bit. Was there ever restitution made to community in general, or where is the community now? How are they? How's the community feeling? How is it? Where's all that?
In our community, there's a lot of frustration with Mount Polley Mine because they promised a lot of things that they didn't deliver on. They promised that they would clean up the tailings, which they didn't. They only cleaned up enough to go back into operation. And then the mine life keeps getting extended and extend further and further as they explore for different gold and silver and other areas of the property.
Can I ask you, when they extend the mine life, do they also extend the waste mine tailings facility, or how do they manage that?
Yeah, everything just gets expanded. So they'll start with a small project and then they'll just keep adding on and adding on. They call it project splitting. So in order to not trigger an environmental assessment, they'll add one little piece over here, but they'll be like applying for, like, say, 15 different small permits instead of one big permit that's a comprehensive overview. They'll split it up into a whole bunch of little permits so that each little permit won't trigger a review. And then with every expansion, if they're exploring in a new area and they want to expand the mine to have a new pit in a new area, then they have to expand the tailings facility. And the original design for the tailings facility is for a much smaller footprint. It's for a much
Yes.
smaller mine. And so that's what happened with Mount Polley is it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it just split its seams and just poured out. And then when they were permitted to go back into operation to repair and to clean up, they just patched it up and then just kept going. And so the laws around the with the requirements for cleanup and the requirements for permitting or for environmental assessments really haven't changed. And it's just really frustrating. It's a really frustrating thing. So having this knowledge up front for your community to know that you are actually quite powerful in this position right now, and to look to other places that have defeated the monster, like the Tailings, where they has stopped the Taseko mines, and they drew on their neighbors to help them do that as well. And so knowing that whatever happens at a mine, like that is going to travel through the world. That's going to move in water. That's going to, move with the animals moving through. Like it isn't actually ever super contained, even if they have a tailings facility. And if it fails, then, it's definitely not going to be contained and it's going to travel everywhere.
Righto. Have you ever seen an example of responsible mining anywhere in Canada, or one that upholds human rights even?
Uh, I sat on a board called the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, or IRMA, and they were trying to create a standard. Well, I was part of that at the time, trying to create a standard that had responsible mining. And as far as I know, there hasn't been a mine that has satisfied all of those things, like protecting the water and human rights seem to be pretty basic things. But when you get into a mining permit or into, a standard, often they are complicated to the point that the mines are able to say, well, oh, that's too costly. We can't do that. How about we do this lesser version? And it's been really an education for me. Like I remember after the Mount Polley disaster, and I was asked to sit on as an advisor to the Global Tailings Review Committee. Um, people in the mining industry were talking about what the acceptable level of death was. And I said, well, one death is too many. And they laughed at me and said that I didn't understand what they were talking about. And I said, no, I just disagree and have very different values than what you're talking about. And they don't include death of animals or impacts to the ecosystem in their evaluations either. So if you are an integral part of that system that you live in, and like the salmon are all gone, they don't even include that in terms of their death assessment. They only count human life. But even in like the disasters that happened after Mount Polley, like in Mariana, Brazil, and Brumadinho, where there was significant loss of life, you know, they are still building dams in the same manner, and they just deem it as acceptable. So there's a huge disparity in values around that.
Phew, that's quite startling. What's an acceptable level of death?
Yeah, yeah,
What
for
a question.
capitalism. Yeah, and that's why I say mining is always mining at all costs. They need to get their cash. They, they will do whatever it takes to make that happen. So, communities who are organizing really need to be have a plan and yeah, learn from others. There's a lot of resources out there. There's a really great book by Joan Kuyek called oh, what is it called? Is it Unearthed? Joan Kuyek. She was part of the Canadian Mining Watch, and it's a really good book about community organizing. So that's a
Yeah,
good one to look up. Mm.
great. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, Unearthing Justice, How to Protect
Unearthing
Your
justice.
Community. Yeah,
Justice.
that's what it is. Unearthing Justice: How to Protect Your Community from the
To
Mining Industry.
So has this disaster shaped your path since, or has it?
Yeah, the Mount Polley mining disaster really changed the trajectory of my life personally. I think in the first 8 months following the disaster, I was just all consumed in being part of the response and this like emergency state of emergency in our community. I was working 18-hour days for months on end, and I got really sick. And it was just a very frustrating and disheartening, like heartbreaking work to do. But I knew that it was something that I could contribute to our community to be part of that. And I stayed as long as I could, basically. And then I just had to step back, and then I really turned toward sharing our story of what we went through with other communities who are facing mining and talking about the Canadian model. I did a lot of work in Alaska, helping them because in northwestern British Columbia, all of that mining water or any disasters would flow down into southeast Alaska. So they're very interested in what's happening in Canada and British Columbia, and also working with other folks on the East Coast who are facing community mining projects, and basically just sharing our experience so that the community has a much more informed understanding of what the realities of mining are and what the potential impacts are of a disaster, because the mine will always say, oh, that's a really small chance of that happening, which is untrue.
Yeah.
And if you look at the third party report that was put out after the Mount Polley disaster, oh gosh, Kirk Van, oh, what's his name now? It's been so long since I think of these names, these engineers' names. It was a commissioned report that British Columbia had, and they had these well-regarded and respected engineers put a report together. But one of the things that they said in that report was that, to kind of expect, like statistically, two fails every decade for mining, the way that mines are being built today. And so not long after that, we had the Mariana disaster, we had the Brumadinho disaster. And then there are other incidents that happen that may not trigger an investigation or a report, but they're cumulatively happening. Like there's oil spills on mine sites all the time. And if it's under, I think at Mount Polley, it was 200 liters. If it was anything less than 200 liters of oil, they didn't have to report it. Like that's a lot of
200
oil.
litres is a lot of oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you think about all of the exploration and the drill rigs and the machines, and it's a lot of diesel and, all of
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
you can imagine what isn't being reported. And so when you add all of that up, it is a giant waste site in every aspect.
I was reading recently, whatever about the working mines which are open and working. An even bigger problem is the mines that are closed, and they run
Yeah.
into the hundreds, if not thousands, particularly in BC and Alaska and so on. And now there's a big problem because the permafrost is melting, and the walls are collapsing, and then they're all it's all running into the same watersheds, which again is wiping out more salmon runs and more, all the way down to the coast. So, like it's a cumulative problem, and it can only get bigger as it is. It can only get worse, and it's it's outrageous. It is outrageous.
Yeah. The climate change and climate disaster, that they go hand in hand with mining, because right now the mining industry is trying to convince people that they can mine their way out of climate crisis.
Yeah,
And because they're providing like rare earth minerals for solar panels and copper and all of this stuff, what
yeah.
they're not telling you is that they are like forcing their way into communities that don't want them. They're mining without consent. They're poisoning the water. And in places like in South America, where you're in the high desert, and they're going after like lithium, where there's like very little water to begin with. They're using all of the water for their mining operations, and then it's polluted by the time they've finished using it. And then in our territory, like in Nukhalk, the glaciers are melting. And so there's new areas opening up under the glaciers where these exploration companies are just frothing at the mouth to get in there, using disgusting language like virgin land that they're ready to like pillage, which also reflects the cultural kind of values based perspective that these miners have towards not only the land but towards the communities they're coming into to extract, to pillage, to do all of these terrible things. And that cumulatively is going to run down the mountains into the watersheds, impact the salmon, like you said, impact the grass beds where all of the there's all these whole sub ecosystems that we are
Equally.
unaware of.
Yeah.
And then like the other species out in the ocean that depend on salmon or depend on the little
The
fry that are going
sprats.
out for food. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of that's impact. And then so you're having this bioaccumulation of like polluted bodies basically, or just a complete collapse due to starvation. And
Yeah.
then that just ripples through everything. So it just goes so much farther than what they are required to report or consider.
Yeah. And one wonders how it's going to end. It can only end badly for us all.
And it's thousands of years of repair, like you don't know. And then the potential for acid formation, like acid rock formation,
Yeah.
they'll always downplay it that it's like potential, but it's like, yeah, but you don't know, you haven't had enough time because that could be over maybe a decade, that could be over 2 decades. Like one of the things I told a mining executive at Imperial Metals was I said, when this project's done, you will move on to the next project. You will take your money, you will take all the money that you extracted from our homelands, and you will move on to the next thing, and you'll never think about us again. But for those of us who are left here, whose home is here, this is now part of our identity and part of the identity of our children going forward. Like my grandchildren are going to have to deal with this disaster, with this pollution, and you'll never think twice about it. You'll just move on to the next place. And that's the reality of mining. It's a boom and bust system also. So if you're working for a mine and prices dip, you're going to be out of a job. Like there's no safety net for you. So that job that they're really hammering that you're going to have, this really well-paying job, is always at the mercy of the markets. And so there's not a whole lot of, confidence in. So if you're buying houses and trucks and whatever you're spending your money on, investing in mortgaging, that could all just go away if there's a crash in the market. A
Yeah.
disaster happens and prices dip, and then your mine that you're at goes into care and maintenance, and you just have to wait it out. So they don't tell you that either.
Yeah. Not a good news story.
Mm-mm. No, I always say that mining is like the biggest secret you've never heard about. They
Yeah.
keep it very, very tight-lipped about mining. They don't have social media accounts and share other than in their own inner circle.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think my last question is what gives you hope?
Oh, I think that the human spirit is absolutely incredible. And when people care and organize and talk to each other and support each other and get their kids involved and use creativity, I think it's incredible what people can achieve. We had a exploration company come into New Hulk territory in 2021, and we issued them an eviction order and raised hell with them, and had media statements ready and plunged their market value on the stock exchange. And I trolled their president on LinkedIn, and he was the only person I followed, and every post he said I was like, you have no authority to be in New Hulk territory, like stay the hell out of our homelands. And just you know, I actually, when we issued that eviction order, the RCMP, the police, the federal police contacted me and left me a voicemail, and they're like, we need to talk to you. And so we took that voicemail and we put it on social media and basically made fun of them. Like, you have no authority to be trying to like shut me up. Like, I have every right to have my opinion and I know what I'm talking about. And they never called me back. So, you know, good trouble, have fun with it. You got to enjoy the resistance, spreading the word and really focusing on your values and what you're trying to protect, I think, is probably the thing that really gives me hope. Like, people are amazing, and a small group of really caring, organized people can do a lot of good work.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to leave this conversation. Nismata, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm so glad. And standing in solidarity from Nlaka'pamux with you. And yeah, give them hell.